I'm Frank Vaughn, and it is Sunday, March 30th, 2025, and this is going to be a long one. You've asked for long-form content. You're going to get it. I'm going to try and clean the desk up today of all the things that I haven't been able to get to for the last little while. So without further ado, let's begin. We're going to start out today with a nice light subject, Canada's Nazi monuments. Why does Canada have not one but several memorials to Nazi collaborators? And why, when statues are toppling all over the world, have Canadian Jewish groups remained silent? Did you know that Canada has statues celebrating SS Waffen members who not only killed thousands of Jews in Western Ukraine, but also ethnically cleansed Poles in the name of Ukrainian racial purity? I started touching on this 2 days ago in one of my videos, but the problem runs far deeper, and I've been wanting to talk about it for a long time because these statues are still up today. And while we have to change the name Ryerson University because of racist allegations against its founder, and we have to attack John A. Macdonald and erase him from our history, we are more than happy to not only allow these monuments to still stand that literally celebrate people who participated in genocide, we also allow the Ukrainian diaspora here in Canada to organize parades and ceremonies celebrating them, including dressing their youth in mock Hitler youth uniforms. Might not be exactly the same, but it's branded and it's similar to what happened in Nazi Germany and Ukraine at the time. Now, the odd thing is, Canadian Jewish groups don't want to talk about it. And this is the part of the story is the story of appeasement of Holocaust distortion when it comes to Ukraine. And we should be asking why. And the answer to that question seems obvious in light of the recent war. There's a huge propaganda drive to paint the Russians as an unjustified invader of Ukraine without actually assessing the facts. And there is a crushing desire in the West, opposed almost alone by Donald Trump, to trigger World War III and go to direct war with Russia. These people are crazy. But this is what was happening in Ukraine long before the war started.
Україна мати, ми за Україну будем воювати. Батько наш Бандера, Україна мати, ми за Україну будем воювати.
Now, those of you who have ears, you might have picked up on the name Bandera. That was the Bandera song that they were singing, a song that there are thousands of videos on YouTube of Ukrainians gathering and singing, and who is Bandera, but instrumental in the organization of Ukrainian nationalists. And you can see some of their symbolism here. We recognize this one. This one has the red of blood, the black of the soil, and the white of racial purity. They were fascists. They were Nazi apologists. They were organized into formal SS brigades, and they ethnically cleansed minorities out of Western Ukraine. And Ukrainians sing these songs with pride, not just in Ukraine, but right here in Canada, in celebrations honoring Bandera, in Edmonton, in Oakville. This has been done right here, and nobody talks about it. Before the war began, Western media used to talk about the problem of neo-Nazism in Ukraine, and now it's called Russian propaganda. But the fact remains that it is so common that you can just go and look for yourself, and you can find hundreds of stories about that problem from the past. Hundreds in Ukraine from 2021. Hundreds in Ukraine attend marches celebrating Nazi SS soldiers. So they can gather together and they can march in the streets without fear of persecution because this is something that is openly accepted in Ukraine. So, and this is something to keep in mind. Slava Ukraini, this saying has its roots in the fascist ideology. In Germany, they used to say the word hail along with the right arm salute of the forbidden one. In Ukraine, it was Slava Ukraini, and along with it was that right arm salute, which is still a common sign in Ukraine today. Yet we're supposed to accept that it's just a myth, that it's just some kind of propaganda. This is a book that nobody's reading. I guarantee you there's not a single person in this audience except the author who wrote it who's reading this book. It's fantastic. The introduction's a bit fraught, but if you keep going with it, It's an excellent book with amazing sources. It's got footnotes. It's got all of the information so you can go and verify it for yourself. It's a well-written book, and it talks about this history of neo-Nazism in Ukraine. We are supporting neo-Nazis not just in Ukraine, we're covering up their celebration right here in Canada. There is a certain segment of the Canadian population that's taken notice of this, but it just can't seem to get that mainstream attention because Russia's bad and politics is getting in the way. Every single time a politician says Slava Ukraini, you need to understand exactly what they're saying and where those words originate from. Victims of Communism Memorial faces call to remove over 330 names linked to Nazis and fascists. So your tax dollars have been spent multiple times building monuments that end up celebrating Nazis, and now it's caught in some kind of bureaucratic trap because they can't figure out how to suck and blow at the same time. So there are two sides of the story. When it comes to Ukraine, you're only getting one. You're only being told that Russia's bad. But before the war began, we used to understand that Ukraine was one of the most fascist states in Europe, one of the most corrupt, and committing horrible crimes against humanity in their eastern provinces, which are now under Russian occupation. That's the full story. And while millions have died in Ukraine because the media in the West can't tell the truth, because your government in the West can't tell the truth, they can't tell the truth that every single attempt at peace was torpedoed by themselves. Not even the Ukrainian people who voted multiple times to support peace. They publish in the media puff pieces like this: I swapped a life of comfort in Bangladesh for an empty fridge and blizzards in Canada. Moving to Canada for my studies was hard, but it taught me independence. Do you think that the experience of the average Bangladeshi is one of a life of comfort and luxury, and that somehow coming to Canada represents a sacrifice of that life of luxury? What kind of BS is this? And that author name, Mohammed Akib Hossan, for CBC First Person. Very good old stock name. The wind howled through the empty streets as I stood at the bus stop, my fingers numb, despite being buried deep inside my jacket pocket. Oh my goodness, it's so terrible being in Canada. This is the puffery that they present to you instead of telling you all the sides of the most important stories. It's pure propaganda. This is that multicultural, cultural mosaic stuff that's supposed to make you feel somehow guilty because you, in a nation of probably 35 million entitled Canadians, but there's 40-odd million here, because you haven't done enough to help the world. It's a guilt trip. And you don't deserve it. You don't owe the world anything. If we try to save the world, we will just drown ourselves. That's what we're being led toward when we're not being led toward World War III. Speaking of Bangladesh, the Americans have figured out that they're broke, so they're trying to fix that problem by killing and curbing their budget deficit. But Canada has decided that we will step into the gap, even though we have a GDP that is a fraction of the size of the United States. We're going to try and outspend them and out-bankrupt ourselves by helping the third world. The government of Canada announces $272 million to Bangladesh to fill in U.S. aid gap. Intersectional democratic spaces in Bangladesh. Not running water, not adequate housing, not addressing the slave labor problem that Bangladesh has. No. Intersectional democratic spaces, whatever the F that means. Gender responsive and inclusive education. Community resilience through locally led inclusion and adaptation. Minister Hussein, another old stock Canadian name, announces support for development projects in Bangladesh and the Indo-Pacific region. $272 million that we don't have, that nobody alive today has. They're borrowing it in the name of your children, and they're shipping it overseas to their corrupt friends. Isn't it just wonderful to be Canadian? Let's get away from the browser for a bit and go to user and viewer comments I found on the internet. My desktop is getting littered with these things, but I guess we won't do that first. We'll do this first because it's the first one I clicked on. This is fine, sustainable, no problem. 102.2 trillion. That's trillion with a T in debt. that the United States has collectively between all layers of government and civilian debt versus a GDP of 28.2 trillion. Now, I've read a figure that it's 32 trillion, but the point still stands that total outstanding debt, all sectors debt, is 3 times the size of the entire gross domestic product of the United States. So that's like saying that if you make $100,000 a year, your debt is $300,000, and you still have the ongoing accruing expenses every single month to deal with. The United States is in a precarious position. There I go. There it goes. This is one of our sitting MPs, Francois Philippe Champagne. Canada absolutely has potential to be a global superpower. I could not agree more, Financial Times. We will bring the visionary leadership, policy framework, and fiscal responsibility to capitalize on Canada's many advantages, unlocking Canada's superpower potential. These are the very people. This is a Liberal. They've been in government for 10 years. They've done nothing but oppose the very thing they're promising to deliver now. They could have built energy projects, but they didn't. They could have built pipelines, natural gas. They could have done anything. They did none of it. But now, because they've swapped Trudeau for Carney, you're supposed to believe that they actually care about the country. Look at the picture. Draped in the Canadian flag. The most bastardized cloth, probably in the history of nations. Because this was verboten. This was they told you that if you carried and sported a Canadian flag, that it flagged you for further investigation and scrutiny by authorities because you might be a radical. And then they flipped the script. And now they drape themselves in it. The very people who have opposed our sovereignty, who have opposed strengthening the Canadian economy and fortifying us against external threats, are now promising to deliver you from the same. And it's patent absurdity. He's part of Carney's cabinet. He's been in government forever, and now he's promising you a brand new vision. It's crazy. They destroyed the country, and now they're saying they're going to save you from themselves. And a huge chunk of the Canadian public is buying it. For the auto sector, this is Scott Moe. For the auto sector, the Liberals are elbows up, but when it comes to the Liberals defending Western Canadian industries and workers, it's elbows down, taxes up. Very true. We have existed in Western Canada for 150 years in opposition to Ottawa. We have prospered against their will. They've wanted to keep us down. They've wanted to keep us politically weak and economically fractured. And they failed, which is a testament to Western prowess, to the ability of Western Canada to thrive in all conditions and overcome all adversity. And our willing partners in our prosperity have long been the Americans, not Canada as represented in Ottawa. So hopefully Scott Moe is putting them on notice, because if Carney wins, this country is on notice. This is just really good. You don't need anything from Target today. You don't need anything from Amazon today. You don't need anything from Sephora today. You're just bored. You don't need more stuff. Go clean your car. Go clean your car. Get up moving. If you're having anxiety and you're worried about the world and you're doom scrolling through social media, shut it off. Go somewhere else. Close this video down before it even finishes and just go get doing something. You'll find, and I find this myself, once I get moving, once I get doing something, all of a sudden, that's all I'm thinking about. That's all I'm focusing on, is getting the task done before me. It's very good for you. And then when you return to doom scrolling, you'll do so with at least a fresh mind. Get up, get moving. Blue Sky has a pedo problem. This is going to bleed into X. Blue Sky has a pedo problem. It was supposed to be a gentler left-wing alternative to X, but my grim experience proves that is the case. And this is by a guy by the name of Jesse Singal. He found out when he went over to Blue Sky that it immediately became a haven for pedophiles who no longer found platform on X. And this is a fact. There was a doctor, a guy by the name of James Cantor. He's still out there, who advocated for the understanding that pedophilia was an orientation and they're people too, and we need to be more understanding. And around him grew this community of so-called minor attracted persons, as they qualify themselves, who openly discuss their attraction to kids. And there was a time on Twitter where you could not counter these people with arguments without facing a ban. I felt it myself. You couldn't even be careful in your words. The instant they reported you, the old Twitter would support them in their efforts, and they platformed them. The new Twitter, the X, under Musk, has banned it. And thank God, because they have no place. So everybody fled to Blue Sky that couldn't put their big boy pants on and actually deal with free speech, with having their points countered by people on X intellectually. They couldn't deal with the pressure of actually dealing with conversation, so they all fled to Blue Sky, where when you go over to Blue Sky, anybody on the right that goes over there gets insta-banned because they just mass report you. There was an article that talked about how the reporting system was so backlogged because everybody was just complaining about everybody else. But if you're a pedophile, it's fine. You can thrive over on Blue Sky. And it's disgusting. And when it comes to X, let's just pull up the browser for a minute here and find the pertinent article. Oh, by the way, let's just do this quick. Trump fact checks trans males. No matter how much surgery and hormones you get, you can never become a woman. It's true. You are what you're born. And you're okay and healthy in the body that you're born in. Anybody telling kids, which is what they're doing it here in Regina, that's another story we'll have to get into, telling kids that they can change sexes or that they were born in the wrong body, but at the same time, and this is always interesting to me, is the gender advocates, most of them are atheists, they don't believe in God, yet somehow they think you were born in the wrong body. And I've always sought an understanding as to how that might happen in the absence of a creator that's playing some kind of cruel joke on humanity by putting women in men's body and men in women's body. They're confused people. They can never become what they're not. And we shouldn't be encouraging this in our youth. We should be telling them it's a delusion and you're okay the way that you are. There was this bill that bans so-called conversion therapy, and it's such a sin because what they called conversion was actually coaching people into being okay with what they were. You weren't allowed to tell them that it was unhealthy to sterilize themselves chemically or to mutilate their bodies in pursuit of something that they can never, ever attain. And then, when the victims of the ideology are left broken and physically mutilated, and they have regrets, they're completely ghosted and ignored, and worse, targeted for destruction by the very activists who led them down the road that turned them into monstrosities. Trump and the United States is walking away from this. I hope Canada follows suit, but I can guarantee you under Carney we will not. Under Poilievre, we have a chance. Under Carney, we can break the country up, and maybe Western Canada can actually advocate for sanity and a restoration of sanity. But I digress. Remember when Elon Musk acquired Twitter and they said it would fail? He fired 60 or 80% of the staff. I don't remember off the top of my head how many it was. They said it would fail, and instead it grew. It grew and it grew and it grew, and now there's more users on X than there's ever been before in its history, and free speech is thriving. Now, some people will point out the fact that if you're hypercritical of Musk in certain ways, he'll just ban you. And I guess that's a small price to pay for the amount of free speech we actually do enjoy. Now, there's certain keywords that will still get you, it won't get you banned, but it'll get you locked out until you do something about it. But you can just use different words and you're good to go. The situation is undeniably better and Twitter is on a better footing. So this is an article talking about how XAI has acquired X in an all-stock transaction. The combined value of XAI is at $80 billion, and X is at $33 billion. It's $45 billion less $12 billion in debt that X currently has. So the valuation for X is $45 billion. That's not bad after a short amount of time. And there was also this idea, which, it appears down here at the bottom. The Democrats have done their best to kill Tesla. And this is, if it's not illegal, it should be illegal, to target a company. Elon Musk really has very little to do with the Trump administration, except he's trying to cure the budget deficit, which is a huge problem. It will take down the United States and the U.S. dollar if it is not dealt with. So they must go about doing it. Why are people getting so upset at the exposure of fraud and waste that Doge is undertaking? They shouldn't be upset about it, but worse than that, they're not just upset. Here's a readout, and the hashtag is Tesla takedown. Take action at Tesla showrooms everywhere. Sell your Teslas, dump your stock, join the picket lines. Hurting Tesla is stopping Musk. Stopping Musk will help save lives and our democracy. The stakes couldn't be higher. No one is coming to save us. Not politicians, not the media. Join us. Sign up to host and find an action near you. Now, they're not mentioning burning Teslas. They're not mentioning committing violence against random Tesla owners, but that's what this leads to. It's not just in the United States. It's happening right here in Canada, and our politicians seem to approve of it. Many of our politicians have talked about personally sanctioning Elon Musk for what? I have no idea. He used to be a darling of the left. The only thing the man is doing is trying to save the United States. That's it. On his own dime. It's costing him enormous amounts of money because they are successfully driving down Tesla stock. As it says here, this will drive Tesla into a death spiral. Mick Ali, The Intercept's former director of information security, explained on a recent Tesla takedown teleconference with other far-left revolutionaries. Now, there is a video that accompanies, but you get the point. Now, they're targeting Tesla for destruction, and there was also this idea that because of the way that X was capitalized, that if they could drive Tesla stock low enough, it would force the sale of the Tesla stock that backed the loans which allowed Musk to buy it. And so now, with XAI acquiring X, it actually gets rid of that risk of that Tesla stock liquidation. So it's just another fear-mongering, hoping for the flame out and burnout of X wish that the left, it's like a drunkenness. They've been on such a self-destructive binge. They want to burn everything great down. X is one of the best platforms out there, if not the best platform. And if it wasn't for X, we wouldn't be enjoying a greater degree of free speech on Facebook or YouTube. You're watching this on YouTube. There's a lot of things I'm saying in these videos that I wouldn't have been able to say 4 years ago. And I'm not kidding about that. I've got the content strikes, violating community guidelines. I published a video, and it was just Donald Trump reading a poem. And I got a content strike for that. I had to complete what I would call a re-education program where I had to answer a bunch of questions about situations to prove that I was a tolerant individual. That doesn't happen anymore. Now, you might get a label on some of your content that provides context. So if you say FLAT Earth, they will put a label right away underneath your video. Or if you talk about climate change, it'll go underneath your video because I said that keyword. It'll probably be on there now. Who knows? I don't know how they do it. But we're allowed to speak. So at any rate, I don't understand what the madness is when it surrounds Elon Musk. It's absolutely unjustified. This guy is just working to save the American taxpayer money. Now back to the whole grooming gender nonsense problem. Saskatchewan has MLAs sitting in the legislature that represent the NDP who have been indoctrinated fully into trans ideology, raising their children in that ideology. I wasn't the first to report it, but it is public information. The NDP in Saskatchewan is not the NDP of Romano, and it is not the NDP, even though it wasn't the NDP, it was Social Credit at the time, of Tom Lee Douglas. It's not the same thing. The land that gave birth to the NDP is lost to the NDP that has become radicalized. This is Lisa Merle. 8 months ago, I filed an access to information request with Regina Public Schools to uncover records about me, my kids, and RPSD's grotesque obsession with gender ideology. What I got? Evasion and a $29,000 fee. We're going to just retweet that as we read this. As a parent of 4 kids in their system, I used Saskatchewan's Freedom of Information law. Regina Public Schools stalled, dodged, slapped me with a $29,270 paywall, which the commissioner just shredded in a 73-page takedown. The commissioner's report: brutal missed deadlines, fake privilege claims, and a deemed refusal to follow the law. My request got silence, then a 54-day late fee estimate. The commissioner even had to threaten them with a summons, a stall tactic. Now, what's this all about? You can go and read this on my Twitter if you want to go through all of this. But it's talking about how they're trampling parental rights, not just all across the country, but right here in Saskatchewan, where they're indoctrinating your kids with this radical ideology that has no basis in fact, that is harming them, confusing them, and breaking their minds, and leading them down a path which leads to sterilization and self-mutilation. That's exactly what it is, and they're hiding it from the parents. And when they're called upon under the law to get the documents, because the documents haven't been released, they now must release the records in 30 days. They're scrambling hard. So in 30 days, we might have an update on this story, but they're hiding what they're doing from the parents. So when you send your kids to public school, do you know what's actually happening to them? Do you know what they're being taught? Do you know what things are being put in their minds that aren't there in the curriculum? Because the parents who are doing the work to try and find out what is happening in your schools are being stonewalled by those who are doing the programming. So stay tuned for more on this one. And since this is kind of related, we'll touch on it. Another cultural icon, Snow White, has been destroyed by Disney. So the animated classic is an actual real movie. It has a tale that people are interested in hearing. The Snow White reboot rebrands the entire thing and drowns it in progressive nonsense language. And it has bombed. Can't make money. Nobody wants to buy tickets for a terrible garbage film that completely abandons the story. Oh, they do this with everything. They've done this with Lord of the Rings, the world of Tolkien. They did it with The Wheel of Time, where The Wheel of Time was one of the most progressive stories that was written in the 1990s. It had a culturally diverse world. Now, the cultural diversity was not intermingled. So each region had its ethnicity and its culture, and everybody was represented, and they were whole and cohesive, and there was some mixing. But that was essentially the tale. The protagonist in the story had 3 wives. They had gay characters, they had lesbian characters, they had all kinds of stuff, and they told a hell of a story, which was amazing to read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I have every hardcover sitting on my bookshelf. I used to save money when I was a teenager to buy the next edition, and it killed me that it was years between the editions. It actually took so long to finish that the original author died, and it had to be finished by someone else. And you can debate whether or not they did a good job. But they did this with Star Wars. They've done it with Snow White. They're taking every one of our cultural icon stories that actually supports progressive narration, but also traditional values, and turning it on its head. So Snow White is currently sitting on IMDb at a 2.2 out of 10 rating. One of the worst films of all time. And this is the meaning of go woke, go broke. We got off on a tangent. I at least intend to clear my desktop today of all my screen grabs. This is Frank Graves. For those of you who don't know, he owns ICOS Research, I believe it's called. It's the ICOS polling company. This shows some of the most bizarre election outcomes, some of the worst polling work done, in my opinion, in the Canadian landscape right now. So Frank Graves says to somebody, he will try to get the link, and then he proceeds to post what you see on screen, which is a local link to his own hard drive. And this is the guy who's driving the conversation that the Liberals are about to sweep into power with a super majority. Oh, it's incredible. Germany-wide anti-terror raid, Brigade En Hamidou in the crosshairs sounds very authentically German. A man was searched and then taken away on the sidelines of the Eritrea Festival in Gleason in 2023. Wednesday's raid targeted supporters of an organization seeking to overthrow the Eritrean government. Now, I just want to ask you, does that sound like a homegrown German problem? Do you think the natural-born German citizen has any interest in the politics of Eritrea? Do you think that this might be a problem that's been brought on by German mass immigration? And is this why you have a conservative government right now who was elected on pausing flights from Afghanistan and pausing immigration, and as soon as they won re-election, they resumed all of the policies that they paused? Do you think that this may be why the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, is now the government in waiting? If the German government doesn't get its act together, enough German people will wake up and discover that it is not a sin to have pride of place, to have pride in one's land and the ability to preserve one's culture. They have got to get over the guilt of the past. Most Germans weren't alive when the events that they feel guilty for transpired. Doesn't mean that they should forget. But how many years, how much destruction should they have to endure before they start worrying about creating a new legacy rather than bearing the guilt of the old legacy exclusively? Ukraine has the same problem. We talked about Bandera earlier in this broadcast. And the fact is, Ukraine has a whole selection of national heroes that they could elevate to that heroic status. But instead of the Germans, who feel guilty about what happened during the Second World War, the Ukrainians, many of them, have embraced the fascist identity. And just because we cover it up here in the West doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So if the German government can support openly fascist aspects of Ukrainian society to prosecute their proxy war against the Russians, if they can do that, why can they not have their own distinct, modern German identity? Why do they have to throw the doors open to the world and let themselves drown in it? A culture and a nation isn't defined by how often it says yes. It is defined by what it says no to. And there's a certain amount of discrimination that the nations of the West, if they wish to preserve themselves, must engage in. One of those forms of discrimination that we must re-engage with is saying that children being offered hormones before they reach maturity is something that we should discriminate against. Telling children in elementary school that they're born in the wrong body and that they can change sexes as easily as clothing is something that we should discriminate against. And there's more items on that list. But if you want to have a healthy and cohesive society, you can't just focus on saying an unrestricted yes to every kind of behavior. You have to start to pick and choose what you say no to. Another thing, that blue sky talk that I just gave, we should be saying no to pedophilia. We should be discriminating against it, not understanding minor attracted persons, but figuring out a way to remove them from society permanently, because nobody should have to live in fear. In a previous video, I highlighted how a man was released to Regina. He was on probation after assaulting sexually a minor. On probation, he went to a Regina park. He kidnapped an 8-year-old girl, took her to a house, and raped her. And now he's back on the street. And the only thing you get is a warning in the media, a press release. Once he's released, you'll never hear about him again until he reoffends. Why should we be expected to bear this burden? He should never see the light of day outside of a jail again. And that's just the way it should be. Canada has a huge problem in that regard too. We have imported so many ethnic conflicts from the old world that just have no place here, including Khalistani separatism, which has captured a large segment in our politics. That's why nobody wants to talk about Khalistani separatism, because they're a very powerful force in Canada. That's an imported ethnic conflict. Did we not have enough tension? Did we not have enough tension in the 70s between the native population and the English and the French, or between the English and the French, or between all the other ethnic conflict we already had that was born right here? We had to start importing it too. You probably haven't heard about it, but Eritreans and Ethiopians rioting in Calgary is a headline that you can read about. Go to Google and type that in. Eritreans and Ethiopians fighting in Calgary. Calgary! And you can read about it. We don't need these problems. People should leave their problems at the door. If you want to become Canadian, then you become Canadian. And I don't care where you come from. But you leave all that behind when you come here. At least that's the way it should be. It's not the way it is. Alan Abbott is a PPC guy with PPC hashtags. Yeah, Canada has a constitution too. Not worth the paper it was written on. Having no rules means any PPC MP will be able to fully represent their constituents rather than the backroom gang controlling all the other parties with conditions. So this guy thinks that the fact that the PPC has no internal rules is a good thing, that it will give PPC MPs max freedom. Well, first off, you're not going to have any MPs because you can't get elected, because this country understands exactly what the PPC is and will not vote for it. Secondly, the guy that sits atop the heap, who sits in the back room that you're talking about, is named Maxime Bernier. And he will remove candidates that he doesn't like and swap in candidates that he does like. And dare I say, he and his people oppose any actual professional growth of the PPC in every way possible because they don't want it to grow. For one reason or another, they have no intention of ever winning anything. Because if they did, they would have given you a constitution, because any decent political party in the modern context has a constitution out the gate. Because members aren't members unless they have member rights. Members aren't really members, they're serfs if they don't. You seem to understand it for your country, but for some reason you don't understand it for your private organization. Everyone I don't like is People's Party of Canada, a proletariat guide to deflect from the World Economic... I'm not even going to translate it. WEF, UN SDGs, and the UN GCM. I don't understand what this is supposed to accomplish. I mean, it's supposed to make fun of me, but it doesn't shake me. But they throw out a bunch of acronyms. Almost, you see that little rainbow flag that they did? Now, they actually did that right. That's the 7-banded rainbow flag. That's actually not the 6-banded rainbow flag that the LGBTQ people use. Now, I know they have the flag with all the other colors, but the main flag that started it all was 6-banded. The flag, or the rainbow, the actual rainbow, has 7, and I would call that the biblical rainbow. I attended a parade in Christopher Lake, Saskatchewan. I don't know if it was last summer. I think it was the summer before last. And down the center in this small town comes a float, and I see rainbows coming off, and I'm like, oh my God, up here too. They're everywhere, these rainbow warriors. But this was actually a church that put this on, and they were looking to reclaim the meaning of the rainbow, the 7-banded rainbow. But that's a rabbit hole for another day. They throw out a bunch of acronyms. I know what they mean, but a reader might not know what they mean. Someone might actually want to learn about those, but this looks very much like some kind of leftist claptrap. It's incredibly weak, and I honestly hope they keep making this stuff about me because it helps my cause. They also love to criticize my position vis-a-vis COVID as if everybody on first encountering the story wasn't at least somewhat concerned with what was happening in China. Now, the thing that worried me in the very beginning, when I put out my work, I seen a clip that they put out where I talking about virologists and people who were going to be responsible for making the vaccine. They put out the 17-second clip, but what they don't tell you is that those people I was talking to all said that any vaccine that was rushed to market within the next year or two, everybody should avoid. That was the message. Back in January of 2020, when Doug Ford was giving speeches in front of Chinese food buffets, talking about how stopping plane traffic from China was racist, one of the things I said is, if we're serious about stopping a pandemic before it starts, we should be halting traffic from the place the pandemic's coming from. And all of our governing officials said that was nonsense. So they let the planes keep landing. They let COVID come into Canada, and they created the circumstance which allowed them to lock everybody down. I also said at the time that if you wanted to reduce your initial viral load, so everybody was going to be exposed to the pathogen, just like you're exposed to the cold or you're exposed to the flu. You're going to be exposed to it. But when it's a new and novel pathogen, if you can limit the amount that you're initially exposed to, it has a certain rate of division. So it invades your body at a certain rate. So it'll double its presence in a given amount of time that shifts around depending on the pathogen. And what you can do with a mask is you can reduce your exposure to initial viral load, giving your immune system more time to adjust. But if you don't use the mask accurately, you see, what we did in society is we engaged mandatory masking without education. The mask couldn't save you from getting sick. And the second you touch it, the second you lower it to take a bite of food at a restaurant, you have voided any effect the mask has. And the longer you wear the mask, the more harm the mask poses to you by trapping bacteria and limiting your ability to process CO2 out of your body. They're a limited use prophylactic, and I talked about that in my video work. And this was before they were mandated. I said, here's how you can use them to minimize your exposure. I gave practical advice. Hundreds of people have thanked me for that advice. And sometimes I got a little heated, but when do I not get a little heated? The government was doing nothing. The government was saying it was just a common cold. I could tell that they were going to flip their script, which they did in April and May of 2020. By that time, my work was largely done. I had warned people to stay away from the vaccine. I started making farm videos to educate people how to become more resilient. And my message was, be ready for these changes and try and be calm in the storm because there's going to be a lot of panic around you. And I was a little elevated getting that out. I'm not going to apologize for it. What's next? We did this. JD says, kind of weird that Zero Media in Canada has caught a picture of Justin Trudeau in the last 2 weeks. Where did he go? What's he doing? No one knows. And the media has a distinct lack of curiosity when it surrounds Justin Trudeau's whereabouts and what he's up to now. And nobody is talking about his legacy. Nobody's talking about building statues in his honor. Nobody's talking about unveiling plaques to commemorate 10 years of the son of Pierre Elliott Trudeau running this country. He's disappeared from public view. That's because, as we've talked about on this channel, the government funds media to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And right now, they're incentivized to not talk about Justin Trudeau because he's toxic waste. All they want to do is talk about Mark Carney. And this is kind of what I'm talking about. This is my YouTube feed. It is 24/7 Carney mania on YouTube. I never see Poilievre's face. Sometimes when I click show more, I'll see Poilievre in one of the videos down there. But 7 out of the 8 videos that they recommend on my desktop are about Mark Carney. And it's been this way for days. And it doesn't matter how many times I click on those 3 dots and I say, show me less of this. It always ends up coming back within a couple days filled with visuals of Mark Carney. The tech lords have their fingers on the scale again. They want this guy. And if you watched my video yesterday, you'll understand that he is the Grim Reaper in more ways than I can count. This is Canadian Chick. I'm in a Northern Ontario mining town. We mine gold, ore, and diamonds, and not one mine up here is Canadian. We had one, but they pulled out because of native land issues. Rest are American, Chinese, or other countries. When Mark Carney talks about sovereignty and they talk about saving Canada and they drape themselves in the flag, understand that you don't even own the resources that are coming out of the ground. The potash that Saskatchewan is so proud of is managed largely by foreign companies. The gold, the minerals, the uranium deals. There are so many multinational companies with their hands in the Canadian piggy bank. And one of the biggest buyers of our resources and development of our resources is China. So when they talk about sovereignty, know that they've already given it away. Jasmine Lane says, can someone explain to me like I'm 5 why Quebec, more specifically Blanchette, is so opposed to pipelines? Because Quebec doesn't want a strong Canada. They're morally opposed to it. A strong Canada is a weaker Quebec, and they like having us bent over a barrel. They don't want better Canadian integration. They want more Canadian division, so long as it doesn't affect the money trough, which is what Quebec is good at, siphoning money off the rest of this country. And keep in mind that Quebec is our voluntary participant. They didn't sign on to the Federation. They only participate via an act of their provincial legislature, which they could rescind. If they want to leave, they can leave whenever they want. The referendums were just a show, a charade, to bend us over a barrel even more, to hold this country together for God only knows what reason. I don't understand what it is that makes people so dedicated to the myth that is Canada. Curious Bystander says, EU deeper integration would make sense if we were willing to develop our resources and export them through Quebec to Europe. As that is not happening, the U.S. is the only game in town for us, regretfully. Or we could ship it west to China. But I mean, we have a choice. We have to pick our trading partners, and the best one is the one that's right beside us with all the money. The largest economy in the world. The global reserve currency. Why we would try to get away from them, I have no idea. This is a pipe dream, probably designed for public consumption to win liberal vote, like to win votes from ignorant people who just don't understand geopolitics. When the election is done, This idea will either be abandoned or it will totally fail. There's no integrating us with Europe. It makes no geopolitical sense whatsoever. Ham Sandwich says they don't understand politics. They actually think the CPC should sacrifice the massive swing vote by pushing out further to the right to recover the PPC's 1 or 2%. Pure stupidity. But if they were politically literate, they wouldn't be PPCers to begin with. This was in response to an argument a PPC guy was making that the swing vote doesn't exist. I don't know what to say to that. I mean, it's a well-defined concept in politics. The swing vote is very real, or they wouldn't be fighting over it. Continentalism in North America could enhance security and prosperity by utilizing resources and geography while distancing from China and globalist influences. However, it faces challenges like trade dependence on China, internal divisions, and possible global backlash. Continentalism is the only way forward. We are moving into a multipolar world. A one-size-fits-all globalism has already failed, and there's a lot of people in the Davos class that haven't understood and got the message. There's no getting rid of Russia. There's no getting rid of China, even though they're safely on the other side of the planet. There's no getting rid of India and their surgent nationalism. The world is going to be multipolar again. It already is. Continental fortress North America is the only thing that makes sense for the United States or Canada. We don't need to engage in global conflicts. If France and Britain want to suicide themselves fighting Russia, let them do it. We'll deal with enough of the nuclear fallout consequences if they get at it, but we don't need to be involved. We can live prosperously over here, and we can still export to the world all of our goods and make all kinds of money for everybody. But we're opposed to it. And I think we're opposed to it because there's a certain class of elites that benefit directly from things the way they are now. But this order is passing away. A new order is coming, and continentalism is the future. Hey, Frank, nobody is mentioning the return of Bill C-63 if Carney returns to office. Getting the separatist view and news will be difficult. If it happens, looking forward to meeting you in prison. That's if we're even in the same facility, Bulldog. And yes, I've mentioned C-63 on this program multiple times. It will come back under Carney. They will censor us. The conversations that we're having right now will become very difficult or impossible to have. We'll be speaking in code, turning our tongues into pretzels, or we won't be talking at all. He could very well shut X down in Canada. He could do all kinds of draconian things, and it's not just C-63. It's the pandemic bill making a comeback, which basically grants the government power in the face of a flu to take over the means of production. It's pure communism represented by the oligarch-in-chief, Mark Carney, which is why I'm voting for the Conservative Party of Canada, because at the very minimum, I will get to retain my voice under a conservative government. I'll be able to criticize them. I'll be able to criticize the globalists. I'll be able to tell the truth on multiple fronts, and I feel there is absolutely no risk whatsoever of the Conservatives passing a censorship bill. They've staked so much of their reputation on protecting free speech and criticizing the practices of other nations on the planet that I have faith that they can't go back on it. And maybe that's foolish, but it's the only option that we have. Eric Coimo says, in Trump's first term, he wanted Canada to buy their cheaper milk. Many farms in the South don't even have barns. The reason milk is cheaper in the U.S. is because they use a hormone that produces more milk. Those cows need to be milked 3 times per day. That tit abuse causes many infections, so their milk is loaded with foreign hormones, full of pus and antibiotics. As long as their milk is no longer real milk, we don't want it. So the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspections Agency, is what handles supply safety. Supply management has nothing to do with supply safety. Supply management governs the amount of milk that is available for the Canadian market. And if dairy producers in Canada produce too much milk, they dump it down the drain. They can't sell it anywhere. They can't have a sale. They can't move it out. That's why milk is almost never on sale. Sometimes you'll see cream on sale before it expires. The supply is regulated by supply management, not supply safety. And you're right. The Americans have an advantage when it comes to climate. However, hormone-free milk, infection-free milk in the United States is far cheaper than the same here. We can lower the tariff barriers. It will hurt our dairy if we do. Now, I'm going to play a clip of Pierre Poilievre next, actually. I think I'll do that next. We can lower those tariffs, and we can still have supply safety. So we can say we don't want milk that was produced with hormones brought into Canada, and it will be illegal to export milk to Canada with those hormones in it. So if you want to get into the Canadian market, you'll have to produce milk the more old-fashioned natural way. And those are the rules that we can set up absent supply management. Now, let's listen to something that Pierre Poilievre said, and I wonder if we can take him at face value.
We want to put an end to this crazy tariff chaos. We have the best trading relationship in the history of the world. Why not continue and grow that trading relationship as two separate sovereign nations? My message to President Trump is that true free trade without tariffs will allow both of our economies to separately grow stronger so that we can fund stronger militaries and more secure borders and make our continent safe against the real risks from overseas.
Now, that music's beautiful, and I believe that the campaign is trying to shift to a softer tone on rhetoric after Carney said the relationship with the United States is over. Striking a very different tone, something that we've been wanting from the Conservative Party this entire time. However, he talks about having a zero tariff relationship with the United States. And I wonder if he's considered the consequences of that statement. If we actually lower the tariffs to zero and we have genuine free trade with the United States, the Canadian economy will change because a lot of the tariffs that we charge are there to protect our agricultural sector. Now, the immediate result of lowering tariffs would be to lower the price of a lot of food products that are now protected. The elevated price of those food products are protected by the tariff arrangements. We have supply management, not just in milk, but we have it in poultry. We have it in maple syrup. We have it in honey to another degree. We love cartels here in Canada. And getting rid of cartels would be a great thing for the consumer. But there would have to be a plan for allowing farms to adjust. If we get rid of the quota system, there has to be some kind of mechanism for them to sell their quota back from the government to the government. So the taxpayers would have to foot the bill for that. And those farms who have conducted themselves in a certain way for decades would have to change. Now, I don't know if the dairy lobby, which is one of, believe it or not, the milk lobby in Canada is one of the most powerful lobbies in the country. I don't know if they're going to sit idly by and watch a system that they've carefully cultivated for decades fall into ruin at the stroke of a pen. So we'll see how this one works out, but I do tilt my head to the softened tone of Pierre Poilievre's rhetoric here. This is kind of related to food. Kimberly says, do people in Canada realize we import from other countries, change the packaging, then stamp it made in Canada? And my answer was no. We don't have country of origin labeling for most food products. We import and then label where it was packed. Meanwhile, you've got government agents patrolling farmers markets in Ontario threatening fines if you don't identify local produce. This was always my issue when I was doing and growing a market garden and selling to the public. I literally had sign cops. They would show up every single year, sometimes multiple times a year, to harass people at farmers markets to make sure, not that we weren't selling imported food. They couldn't give a damn about that. If you were selling bananas, they were fine. They wanted to make sure that all of the food that you were selling that you produced yourself had product of Ontario labeling. And there were certain labeling requirements. And if you didn't meet them, you would be fined. And they would threaten to close your business down. The same thing happened when it came to food testing. So every single year, some student would drive up in a government car. It was usually a very nice, almost sports car. They would drive up and they would demand food. So they would pay you at first, and then it became a system where they don't pay you. You just have to donate your produce so that they can take it to a lab and test it for heavy metal contamination. Food out of your own garden. more thorough testing than we do for imports. So they had a heavy police presence on those who were actually growing local food, but a minimal to non-existent presence on imports. And that's even worse now. You go and you buy a bag of almonds, and you look at that almonds. It won't tell you where the almond was grown. It'll tell you where it's packed. It's all in Canada. So they bring it in large quantities, largely untested. They pack it here in Canada, and you don't have any right to know where it came from. And this is becoming a prevalent problem in the food industry. Meanwhile, their policing efforts, which they back with massive government spending, target and harass small crop growers who are just trying to sell at a local farmer's market. One of the things I enjoy about Saskatchewan is that problem's not here yet, not on that scale. In Ontario, just to sell a jar of jam, you're supposed to have a fully certified kitchen. Stainless steel, labeling requirements, can't be your own kitchen, must have its own separate entrance. So many rules. They shut down the ability of, because the farmers markets and the churches were exempt from some of these requirements, and it was a fight for over a decade just to be able to sell stuff. And we would say to the government when we went to these meetings, because I went to many of them myself, and I would say, can you find one instance where somebody got sick or died from something they bought from one of the 100 and some odd farmers markets that are scattered around Ontario? Just one. And they couldn't come up with a single one. But you could point out how many people Maple Leaf Foods killed and other big processing houses, how many people their bad practices harmed, but they just get to go on about their business. And the harassment targets the little guy. This was always one of my biggest problems with supply management, whether it was chickens and poultry, whether it was milk and cheese. The little guy can't get in. A small producer can't get in. With supply management around poultry, originally you could raise up to 100 birds without being part of the supply management system. But it was a lot like masonry. You couldn't tell anybody that you had chicken for sale. They had to ask you first. You couldn't market it. You couldn't put up signs advertising that you had chicken for sale. You literally couldn't tell anybody what you were doing. They had to figure it out on their own and then ask you, and then it was legal for sale. And we had to fight like hell to get that limit raised to 300 birds. But you still couldn't talk about it. That's not about supply safety. That's about protecting a racket that increases the cost of food for Canadians, whether you support it or not. You're paying more to protect those rackets. The dumb Norwegian says, Canada cannot survive without unfair tariffs on American goods. Number 2, Canada cannot defend itself without America coming to its aid in a real conflict. Number 3, Canada cannot survive equal tariffs or lack thereof. Conclusion, Canada is already a territory of America. It's actually a really compelling argument. If we rely on the Americans for defense, and we rely on them giving us an unbalanced trade relationship to maintain ourselves, all while we boo their national anthem, act hysterical about them applying tariffs to us, denigrate them at every single opportunity, and our principal identity as Canadians is that we're not Americans. We literally spit in their face while they defend us and enable our survival. So it's not just that we are no longer sovereign when it comes to China and India and these companies and countries that have taken over our nation and have gutted us. A government that is captured. If you watched yesterday's video, the start of that video, how somebody that's running for the Liberal Party is recommending that you turn over a conservative candidate to the Hong Kong, basically Chinese authorities so that you can collect an award that's been put on their head. All while Melanie Jolie claims that's not happening and one of their candidates is doing it and nobody in the media is telling you that that's happening. We're captured in more ways than one. And the only reason we have a shot at sovereignty right now, the only reason we have a shot to save Canada and be a free country again is because of the Americans. It's not because of your government. It's not because of anybody else. It's because of the pressure the Americans are putting, the spotlight upon us. They're actually doing us a favor. And I could care less if most of this country disagrees with me, specifically the areas of the country that are in the middle. This is the fact. Canada, its guard's down. Our sovereignty has already been given away. Michael Dmitrijevic, hopefully I know I brutalized that. Daniel and Mo have about 6 months at the very most to institute some very radical changes, or they are going to wake up to an entirely new energy landscape where the futures of our two provinces will be very bleak. The U.S. has mobilized Drill Baby Drill in the Gulf of America, and Alaskan deeds are quickly being snapped up. In 1 year, things will look very different. America is about to become an energy production powerhouse. And in this new energy environment, our heavy crude that we produce here in Canada might not have access to market. Do you realize we have to buy light crude to just mix with our crude so that we can ship it through pipelines into the United States already? This might be why Smith is eagerly courting the Americans. It might be why Mo is eagerly courting the Americans, because we need them and we don't want to be left out. The energy bonanza that Trump is working to unleash in the United States is just another layer to the threat to the West. It's not just Ottawa. It's that if we dilly-dally and we allow Ottawa to conduct a war with the Americans, the West could be left out with nowhere and nobody needing to buy our product. We can't build pipelines fast enough to fix that. So, while it's all well and good for Pierre to talk about restoring Canada and creating strength and energy independence, these are all things that are a long way off. In the meantime, everybody just gets to be unemployed. That's not an outcome that's desirable for anybody. Shifting back to Ukraine for a minute, Glenn Deason says Boris Johnson now admits that Ukraine nationalists did not allow Zelensky to implement the peace agreement in 2019. 73% of Ukrainians voted in 2019 for Zelensky's peace platform. People forget this stuff. To make peace with Donbass and Russia by implementing the Minsk agreement. But then, U.S.-funded nationalists and fascists and NGOs financed by Western governments threatened Zelensky to abandon his peace mandate. These threats were made in the open, but our media did not report on it. Noticing a theme? If the Minsk peace agreement had been implemented, Russia would not have invaded. The nationalists became NATO's veto power against any peace agreement, as our governments could argue that Ukraine decides when to negotiate. The claim by our governments and media that Russia would not accept a compromise and was responsible for the failure of diplomacy was a lie to sell a long war. If the opponent does not want peace, then war is the only solution, and we must fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. And that is the real tragedy. Our policies and our dilly-dallying and all the Ukrainian flag waving that we're doing there. And every time our politicians use the term Slava Ukraini, they're actually advocating for the continued mass slaughter of an entire generation of men and women. It's tragic. It was completely avoidable. Those are the facts, and we should all be trying to end this war sooner rather than later, leaving whatever on the table. The Russians control the theater. The Russians are advancing. They're not going to give up what they've taken through blood. And this idea that we can force them back or we can send troops over there, all that leads to is the mega death of our civilization. We are out of options. We need to negotiate now and stop the killing. That's the good that we can do. And there will be new borders. And that's all there is to it. All the virtue signaling in the world isn't going to change the reality on the ground. Bruce McGonigal. I love that name, McGonigal. There's something really fun about saying that. McGonigal. The Conservative Party ran the 2021 election on opposing vaccine mandates and passports. They voted against mandates in the House of Commons repeatedly, while the PPC helped create ArriveCan. Now, the PPC didn't directly help create ArriveCan, but they ran a candidate who benefited directly from it. The CPC can't say the same thing. These are facts that PPCers need to reckon with. You can't rewrite history to suit some broken narrative. And this was in response to somebody saying, "You're joking, right? I do not recall the CPC opposing any of the mandates or exposing a single thing." Yet another person who can't use the internet, who can't use, Use Grok as a search engine if you don't like Google, and then verify the stuff yourself. It's a matter of parliamentary record that the Conservative parties opposed mandates the entire time. They didn't push mandates. The second they had the opportunity, before Pierre Poilievre came along, when Candace Bergen was there, they pushed against mandates. And they failed because the House was controlled by the Liberals, the NDP, and the Bloc Québécois, who love it, love the totalitarian power. If you want to criticize the Conservative Party of Canada, and I've done that plenty on my channel, just do it factually. They opposed mandates. End of story. What do we got next? This was an interesting one. I've lost all hope. That's what a 23-year-old licensed electrician making $90,000 a year told me today. He continued, I've come to the conclusion I'll never be able to own a home. Can't save fast enough for a down payment. I can't even think about starting a family. First of all, think about moving. There's jurisdictions. It's not just Saskatchewan where the land is cheap and demand for work in your area is high. There's a future to be had still in this country. You just have to want to move with your feet. But unfortunately, he's right. $90,000 a year is a drop in the bucket now because the government takes so much of it. And it's not just your income taxes and your sales taxes and your property taxes. It's also the CPP, which I've talked about in this video. Sorry, my computer just started making funny noises. They take so much of it away from you. And the more money you make, the more you're penalized. The more productive you are, the more you're penalized. Randy Hillier says, 35 years ago, I was an electrician making $50,000 a year. Bought a house for $112,000, 2 times my yearly salary. Had 4 children. My wife stayed at home. The new truck was $16,000, not $70,000, and gas was about 60 cents a liter. Phil Rack says the stats can data backs up your anecdotal evidence as well. From 1965, pre-Pierre Elliott Trudeau, home ownership rates as higher than today. Typical single income. We work twice as many hours we do to pay taxes. We work to pay taxes. That's why you work so hard. It's to pay taxes so that they can give it away to Bangladesh. Debt to income ratio of 55% of one income versus 180% now of 2 incomes. And we have a fertility crisis as a result because the government takes so much of your productive money out of circulation to give away to Bangladesh. You can't afford to have kids. Many people feel that pressure. Many people feel like they can't do it. I always push back and say that you'll be able to find a way. The highest rates of birth in this country are among the poorest people. It shouldn't be that way. And there's a demonization of the family, of traditional family units, which are the backbone and bedrock of any solid civilization. The family unit is the chief principal economic unit in civilization, which is why I would say it's being undermined, because if you can undermine the family, you can undermine a civilization. And our civilization's enemies, looking at China, are happy to see us undermined through various means. I would encourage people to have kids anyway. You'll find a way. But all that being said, your tax burden is what's increased. The reason they advertise something as repugnant to me as $10 a day daycare, you are going to go to work and be a tax slave. You're going to give away the hours of your life until you're well advanced in years. You're going to miss out on the best your children, you're going to miss out on the best time in the relationship that you will have with your children, the formative years, and you're going to farm out raising them to the lowest common denominator worker, because that's what $10 a day daycare does. It brings in people who don't care about your kids. You might have the best daycare in the world. Look, I've seen this. Take the kids to the park. Pick a park in any town. You take them there, and eventually you're going to run into the daycares, bringing the kids out. And this actually happened to me recently. This was in a previous summer. We're at the playground, pushing the kids on the swings. And the daycare kids come over, and they're begging you for a push. They're begging you for attention. All the daycare workers are on their cell phones. Couldn't care less. As long as all the kids are in the park and they're not running in traffic, they don't care. They don't interact with them. They don't give them any time. They're busy doing their own thing. And all of these kids are swarming you, looking for attention and affection, and it's tragic. It breaks my heart. This is what you're trading your family away for, to pay taxes, to fund all of these foreign projects, gender diversity in Bangladesh. That's what you're giving your life away for. And that, my friends, is as long form as we're going to get today, because I'm already hours into making this video and I'm plumb out of time on this Sunday. If you like the work, please consider supporting it via the website. I can use a budget. And if you made it this far, was it worth your time to watch this much? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Did you know that I have a website, frankvaughn.ca, the ultimate repository for all of my work, and a backup location just in case the censors come for me again? And if you like the content, please consider using the donate link in one of the options available. There are no paywalls, there is no advertising, and there is no Patreon, and I intend to keep it that way. Thank you for your time and your consideration.